What's up everyone, and welcome to another Rust Pro Series video. I'm Gneissish, and today we are talking about the memory cell. This is easily one of the most useful switches in this game, if not perhaps one of the most confusing switches in this game if you have not yet had a chance to try it out. So the goal here is going to be to provide a clear explanation as to how this thing works. We're going to kind of play around with it over here, and I'll show you the it applied to the famous trap example that a lot of people use, although it is not limited to this. So using this graphic, we're going to start over here, and we're just going to kind of talk about the inputs and outputs of this switch. This is a craftable switch. It has a single power input at the bottom here, and it has two outputs, an inverted output and an output. It is not a splitter. It will not split up voltage coming out the other side. It will either pass it out one side or the other, depending on where it is set. It is notoriously glitchy, even now. So sometimes, you'll put voltage to this thing and it'll say 0 coming out, or it'll half it for some reason. So you just have to ignore that part of it and just know that whatever you send to it, it's going to send that -1, because it requires 1 to operate. So -1 volt out, whatever output it is set to. So as of the last update, like I said, it now requires a volt to operate. So you will need to send at least 2 volts to this if you want to pass 1 or more out one of the outputs there. It has 3 inputs on the side: a set, reset, and toggle. The toggle is as it is described, as it's labeled. It just toggles the 2 outputs back and forth every time it receives a volt to either the inverted or output. It has 2 inputs associated with each of these outputs here. We have the set input is color-coded to match, for the output, so you can see how those are paired. And then it has a reset input, which is color-coded to match the inverted output here, so you can see that this input is associated with this output, this is associated with this output. And the way that works is, it has a default state when if you first power it up, when you've installed it, its default output is the inverted output. That's where it starts, and that output is associated, like I said, with the reset input here. So if it were on this output already and you sent a volt to the reset, it's not going to change, because this reset only sets this switch to the inverted output. If it were in the inverted output in the default setting and you were to send a volt to the set input, it would switch it to the output. It would switch it to this new output called the output and it would stay there until the reset or toggle, but most commonly the reset, received a volt to switch it back to the inverted output. And that is sort of the essential function of this switch, is that it has these 2 outputs that in order to switch back to one or the other, it needs to receive a signal or a reference volt, 1 volt, to either the set or the reset, or in specific instances maybe you use the toggle. So it also has indicators on it. It has a yellow and a red light if it's in the default inverted output, otherwise known as state 0. And so when it's in the state 0, you'll see a green light and a red light on the front of it. That means it's here, the output is coming up the left side here, the inverted output, and that associated input is here. If it's 2 dual green lights, that means that it's set in state 1, which is the output side, and it is set from this input here and this output. And that's pretty much it. That's all you really have to know, is it requires a volt, has 1 power in, and will pass power out one of the tops, whichever one it's set to, and you can set those using the inputs or toggle between them using the toggle. So let's move on to just sort of playing around with this. I've got a power bank here. If you're curious, more about why I set my batteries and inputs up this way, I'll link that video. You can check that out. But I've got this sort of generic setup here. I've got a power bank. I've got a battery. I've got this branch coming off my battery. And what I've done is I've hooked up the memory cell off a switch. So I've set this branch out to 3 to accommodate I need 1 to power this switch. I need 1 to power the memory cell itself, and then 1 to pass through for these examples. So if I turn this on, the memory cell is going to start in its default, or the inverted output, like we saw over there, the top left output. And so it's just sending out 1 volt, and as I pointed out earlier, it says 0, but that's clearly not the case. And if you look at the power in on this light, it also says 0, but we know down here it's sending 2 using 1 and passing 1. So you'll just have to just know what you sent, and you'll know what's coming out. And so in its default setting, again, you see the 2 lights, green and red. That's the inverted output. That matches this right here. right? So here we go. It's state 0. If I were to send a signal to the set input, which I've color coded to match these two and these orange ones here. If I send a signal using this button, it's going to switch the memory cell now to the output. And so that's again paired with this one. So now we're on the output. And so we've taken that 2 volts, it's using 1, so it's got 1 to pass. It is now switched from passing it from this side over to this side because I sent a volt to the set input that is associated with that output. If I want to switch it back, if I send a volt to the reset input, that'll switch it back to the inverted output. There you go. And so that's the reason they call this the reset versus the set, is that because the inverted output is the default starting point for this switch's output, reset brings it back to what it started with, is the idea there. And so the set is the, hey, let's set it to something else and then reset it back to where we started. You can think of it that way. Toggle is what I said over there. It's just simply gonna toggle it between the two outputs, and it doesn't, it can just bounce back and forth. So this is useful for a variety of things, swapping lights, whatever it is you want. But the primary power of this switch, you could say, is the fact that it has these paired inputs that allows you to adjust the output of whatever you're passing to one side or the other. So that's pretty much it. Not too complicated. So what I'm going to show you now, real quick, is this whole idea here set up on this mock trap base. This is of course not ideal. This is just for an example. So this is not, I often will build this type of little pass-through inside my base somewhere so that when door raiders are coming in, I'll conveniently leave a couple doors open for them so they pass through something like this and they get caught mid-raid with all their raid gear still intact. I get a signal somewhere through a smart alarm or whatever, and can take all their stuff. So what I've done here is I've set up these 3 furnaces. Behind these furnaces is I can see if I can clip back there, is a laser. I've got that right there. That laser right there is running to the set input on the memory cell in there. So what that laser is going to do is it's going to switch that memory cell in there on the wall, which you'll notice is green and red. That means we're currently on the inverted output, which means our power is coming out of our inverted output here, which means that so what I've done is I've set this first door powered to I've got a door controller up there. You can't see right behind that roll there. And that's set to that inverted output, the orange line there that runs to this door right here, because I want that door open. So I put the door I want open on the default side because that's sending power. Now, what this laser is that I've hidden behind this furnace, and I've done that because the furnace, if you set it right, you can kind of just sort of play around until you get it. It'll block the beam, so you can't see it, which is incredibly convenient. What I've done with that laser is the laser's output is running to this set input so that when it's crossed, it will swap the memory cell in there from inverted output to output. And so if I walk in there we go, it swapped this memory cell. And what I did was I hooked up the output to these doors. So then this is the essential idea of this trap base, is why it works so well, is that the memory cell switched over. If I close this, you can see it. And now it's the two green lights, which means we're on the output side. That output side I sent to this door here so that it would open this door once the power swapped from inverted to output. This door lost power, so it closed, because door controllers work like momentary switches. And so that's how this works. So if I were to, and then I set up this button out here just to show you that once I hit this button is sending to this reset, which is going to set it back to the inverted. If I press this button, it's going to swap everything back over, set the switch back to its default output, which is the inverted output, and reset the trap for the next person who comes in. And so that is the most common use of this, but you can use this for anything. I mean, some things that I've used it for is, for fun. I've had, put a bunch of red lights in my base, and if a raider starts coming in, I've got an HBHF sensor set to this set input here, and all the lights in my base shut off, my standard lights, and swap to these red lights to indicate, some kind of raider is outside. Sort of battle ready, if you will, whatever. There's a ton of things that you can do with this. Maybe in later videos I'll cover some more of those, more uses. But this is the like the starting point for you to understand how this thing works for whatever it is that you're trying to build. So that, folks, is just about all I've got on this topic today. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Otherwise, you can get me on my Discord. See you later.